In a small, quiet town nestled between rolling hills and endless fields of golden crops, life moved at its own gentle pace. The air smelled of fresh earth and wildflowers, and the only sounds that filled the mornings were birds chirping and the occasional rumble of a tractor in the distance. This was Daniel Harper's world, a place where simplicity reigned supreme, and people lived in harmony with nature. For as long as anyone could remember, Daniel's family had been tied to the land. His grandfather had farmed these acres decades ago, planting seeds not just in the soil, but also in the hearts of those who called this corner of the countryside home. Daniel, now in his mid-40s, had inherited the sprawling farmland after his grandfather passed away. But unlike his forefathers, Daniel didn't spend all his days plowing fields or harvesting crops. Instead, he struck an agreement with the state government to lease the land for agricultural research. It was a win-win situation. The state used the farm to test sustainable farming techniques, while Daniel retained ownership and earned a steady income. He still oversaw things during harvest season, making sure everything ran smoothly. To him, it wasn't just about money. It was about preserving the legacy of his family and contributing to something bigger than himself. Life on the farm suited Daniel perfectly. He woke up early, brewed a strong cup of coffee, and spent hours walking through the fields, checking on the progress of the crops. Sometimes he'd sit under the shade of an old oak tree, watching the sun rise over the horizon. It was peaceful here, almost therapeutic. Nothing ever seemed out of place, until recently. A few months earlier, a new housing development had sprung up along the edge of Daniel's property. Rows of cookie-cutter homes with manicured lawns now bordered what used to be open fields. The residents were mostly city folks who had moved to the countryside seeking a simpler life. But instead of embracing the rural charm, they'd brought their urban sensibilities with them. They formed a homeowners association, HOA, complete with rules about lawn maintenance, noise levels, and even the color of front doors. Among the newcomers was Karen Wilkins, a woman whose reputation preceded her. She was loud, opinionated, and had a knack for stirring up trouble. Within weeks of moving in, she appointed herself the unofficial leader of the HOA, patrolling the streets with a clipboard in hand, ready to pounce on anyone who dared break the rules. Her neighbors alternated between admiring her dedication and dreading her visits. Some joked that she treated the HOA handbook like it was the Constitution itself. At first, Daniel paid little attention to the changes happening nearby. After all, his farm had been there long before the subdivision existed. What could possibly go wrong? But one crisp autumn morning, as Daniel prepared his tractor for the upcoming harvest, he noticed someone standing near the fence line. Squinting against the sunlight, he recognized Karen from afar. She stood stiffly, arms crossed, glaring at his equipment as if it were some kind of eyesore. Curious, Daniel walked over to greet her. "Morning," he said cheerfully, wiping grease-stained hands on his jeans. "Can I help you with something?" Karen adjusted her oversized sunglasses and pursed her lips. "Yes, actually. You can explain why your machine is disturbing the peace around here." Daniel blinked, unsure whether to laugh or feel insulted. "This is my farm," he replied calmly. "I've been using this tractor for years. It hasn't caused any problems before." "Well, times have changed," Karen snapped, flipping through papers on her clipboard. "According to our HOA guidelines, industrial activity within proximity to residential areas requires prior approval. Your tractor violates multiple clauses, including noise ordinances and aesthetic standards." Daniel stared at her, dumbfounded. How could someone so disconnected from reality think they had authority over his land? Before he could respond, Karen turned on her heel and marched back toward her shiny SUV, muttering something about dealing with this later. As Daniel watched her drive away, a sinking feeling settled in his stomach. Something told him this wouldn't be the last he heard from Karen. And he was right. The tension between Daniel and Karen simmered like a pot left on low heat, ready to boil over at any moment. The next few days were anything but peaceful for Daniel. Every time he started his tractor or drove it near the edge of his property, Karen seemed to appear out of nowhere, clipboard in hand, scribbling furiously as if documenting some grave offense. She'd stand by the fence line, arms crossed, her oversized sunglasses reflecting the sunlight like a shield of authority. To Daniel, she looked more like a character from a comedy sketch than someone who posed a real threat, but he couldn't ignore the fact that she was dead serious. One crisp morning, Daniel decided to confront Karen directly. He had work to do, and he wasn't about to let her constant interference slow him down. As he steered the tractor toward the field closest to the subdivision, he spotted her once again, this time with reinforcements. 2 other neighbors stood beside her, nodding obediently as she lectured them about maintaining community standards. Daniel parked the tractor and climbed down, dusting off his hands. "Karen," he said, forcing a polite smile, "can we talk for a minute?" Karen whipped around dramatically, clutching her clipboard to her chest. "Oh, good. You're finally here. I was just explaining to my colleagues how your tractor is ruining the ambience of our neighborhood." "Ambience," Daniel repeated, raising an eyebrow. "It's a farm, Karen. Tractors are kind of part of the deal." She pursed her lips, clearly unimpressed by his attempt at humor. "Be that as it may, you're disturbing the peace. My neighbors have complained about the noise. And frankly, the sight of that machine is unsightly." "Unsightly," Daniel echoed, incredulous. He gestured to the vast expanse of farmland behind him. "This isn't exactly a golf course. Farms come with tractors, dirt, and yes, even noise during harvest season. This has been going on for decades." Karen waved a dismissive hand. "That was then. Things are different now. We have rules to protect property values and ensure quality of life for everyone." Daniel took a deep breath, trying to keep his frustration in check. "Look, Karen, I understand you're just doing your job, or whatever it is you think you're doing. But this is my land. I've owned it longer than you've lived here. If there's an issue, maybe we can find a way to work it out without all this drama." But Karen wasn't interested in compromise. She flipped through her clipboard, pulling out a printed copy of the HOA guidelines. Section 3.2 clearly states that industrial equipment operating within 500 feet of residential properties must receive prior approval. Section 4.7 prohibits activities deemed disruptive to the aesthetic appeal of the community. Your tractor violates both. Daniel stared at her, dumbfounded. "You're telling me my tractor needs permission to exist on my own farm?" "That's exactly what I'm saying," Karen replied smugly. "If you want to continue using it, you'll need to submit a formal request to the HOA board. Until then." She trailed off, letting the implication hang in the air. Daniel shook his head, struggling to believe what he was hearing. "This is ridiculous. I don't have time for this nonsense. People depend on these crops, not just me, but the state too. Do you even know why I'm farming this land?" Karen rolled her eyes. "I'm sure you'll figure it out. Rules are rules, Mr. Harper." With that, she turned on her heel and marched back to her group of followers, leaving Daniel standing alone by the fence. He watched as they huddled together, whispering and casting judgmental glances his way. For a brief moment, he considered walking away, ignoring Karen altogether, and getting back to work. But something told him this wouldn't end there. Karen wasn't the type to back down easily, and judging by the determined look on her face, she already had a plan brewing. Later that afternoon, as Daniel worked in the field farthest from the subdivision, he noticed a tow truck pulling into view from the corner of his eye. At first, he thought it might be a coincidence, a neighbor needing assistance or perhaps someone lost looking for directions. But as the truck rumbled closer, its destination became painfully clear. His tractor. "No way," Daniel muttered under his breath, dropping his tools and sprinting toward the scene. By the time he arrived, Karen was standing triumphantly beside the driver, pointing at the tractor as if it were evidence in a crime scene. Her expression was one of pure satisfaction, as though she'd just won a battle against chaos itself. "What are you doing?" Daniel demanded, his voice rising with anger. Karen crossed her arms, unfazed by his reaction. "Enforcing the rules, Mr. Harper. Since you refuse to comply, we've taken matters into our own hands. Your tractor will remain impounded until you pay the fine and file the necessary paperwork." The sight of his tractor being loaded onto the flab truck felt surreal to Daniel, like watching a scene from a movie where the protagonist is blindsided by an absurd twist of fate. He stood there, hands on his hips, jaw clenched, as the tow truck driver secured the massive machine with chains. Karen hovered nearby, her arms crossed, and a smug grin plastered across her face. She looked like she'd just won a game of chess against a grandmaster, completely oblivious to the fact that she was playing an entirely different match altogether. "This is ridiculous," Daniel said, his voice low but firm. "You can't just take my equipment. This is private property." Karen raised an eyebrow, tapping her clipboard for emphasis. "Actually, I can asterisk. As I'd already explained, your tractor violates HOA regulations. Until you submit the proper paperwork and pay the fine, it stays impounded. Consider this a learning experience, Mr. Harper." "A learning experience," Daniel repeated, incredulous. "For what?" "How to deal with people who think they're above the law." Karen's smile faltered slightly, but she quickly recovered. "It's not about being above the law. It's about following it. Maybe next time you'll think twice before ignoring the rules." Daniel wanted to argue further, to point out the sheer lunacy of towing a tractor off farmland that had existed long before her precious HOA even came into existence. But he knew it would be pointless. Karen wasn't listening. She was too busy basking in her self-righteous victory. Instead, he took a step back, forcing himself to stay calm. Losing his temper wouldn't help. He needed to focus on fixing this mess. As the tow truck rumbled away, carrying his tractor toward the impound lot, Daniel climbed into his pickup truck and followed at a distance. His mind raced with questions. What was he supposed to do now? The harvest season was critical, and every hour wasted meant potential losses, not just for him, but for the state-funded research projects relying on these crops. And then there was the principle of the matter. How could someone like Karen, who clearly had no understanding of rural life or agriculture, dictate what happened on his land? When he arrived at the impound lot, a sprawling fenced-in area filled with rows of abandoned vehicles, Daniel parked his truck and approached the office. Inside, a bored-looking clerk sat behind a cluttered desk, scrolling through his phone. Daniel cleared his throat to get his attention. "I'm here about a tractor you just towed," Daniel said, trying to keep his tone neutral. "It belongs to me." The clerk glanced up, unimpressed. "Name?" "Daniel Harper." The man tapped a few keys on his keyboard, squinting at the screen. "Ah, yes. Here we go. Towed for violating HOA guidelines. That'll be $500 to release it." Daniel sighed, pulling out his wallet. Paying the fee wasn't the issue. It was the principle. He handed over the cash, signed some papers, and waited while the clerk called for someone to retrieve the tractor. As he leaned against the counter, tapping his fingers impatiently, an idea began to form in his mind. By the time the tractor was finally returned to him, the sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the lot. Daniel climbed into the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel tightly. He was angry, yes, but more than that, he was determined. Karen might have thought she was teaching him a lesson, but she had no idea who, or what, she was dealing with. Back at home, Daniel sat at his kitchen table, staring at the lease agreement between him and the state. It was a thick document filled with legal jargon, but one thing was crystal clear. The farmland was protected under state jurisdiction. Any interference with its operations could have serious consequences, not just for Karen, but for the entire HOA. A slow smile spread across Daniel's face as he picked up the phone. If Karen wanted to play hardball, he was ready to show her exactly who she was up against. Little did she know, her little power trip was about to backfire in ways she couldn't possibly imagine. Daniel's fingers hovered over the phone for a moment before he dialed the number. He wasn't sure how this call would go, but one thing was certain. It was time to bring in reinforcements. The state agriculture department had been a silent partner in his farming operation, providing funding and resources for research while leaving the day-to-day management to him. But now, with Karen's antics threatening to disrupt everything, it was time for them to step into the spotlight. The phone rang twice before a friendly voice answered. State Agriculture Department. This is Lisa speaking. How can I assist you? Hi, Lisa. Daniel began, leaning back in his chair. This is Daniel Harper. I lease my farmland to the state for agricultural research. Does that ring a bell? Oh, yes, Mr. Harper. Lisa replied warmly. We've received great reports from your site. Is there an issue we need to address? Daniel hesitated for a split second, unsure of how much detail to share up front. Well, there's been a situation. Someone from a nearby homeowners association has been interfering with operations on the farm. They actually towed my tractor today because they claim it violates their rules. There was a pause on the other end of the line. When Lisa spoke again, her tone was sharper, more professional. I see. Can you tell me more about what happened? For the next 10 minutes, Daniel recounted the entire ordeal, the confrontations with Karen, the towing incident, and the HOA's refusal to acknowledge the farm's long-standing presence in the area. By the time he finished, Lisa sounded both concerned and determined. Mr. Harper, thank you for bringing this to our attention, she said firmly. This is unacceptable. Your farm is protected under our lease agreement, and any interference could jeopardize important research projects. Let us handle this. We'll send representatives to speak with the HOA and clarify the legal standing of your property. Relief washed over Daniel as he hung up the phone. For the first time since the conflict began, he felt like he had the upper hand. But he wasn't done yet. After the call, he pulled out his laptop and drafted a formal letter to the HOA board. In clear, concise language, he outlined the facts, the history of the farm, the state's involvement, and the potential consequences of further interference. He attached copies of the lease agreement and legal documentation proving the farm's status as protected land. Satisfied with his work, he printed multiple copies and prepared to deliver them personally. The next morning, Daniel drove to the HOA clubhouse, a bland, cookie-cutter building that looked like it belonged in a corporate brochure rather than a rural community. As he walked inside, he noticed Karen holding court in the corner, surrounded by her usual entourage. She spotted him immediately and smirked, clearly expecting another round of arguments. But Daniel didn't give her the satisfaction. Instead, he approached the front desk and handed the receptionist the stack of letters. I'd like these distributed to the HOA board members, he said politely. They contain important information about the farm and its legal status. Karen's smirk faded slightly as she watched him walk away. For once, she seemed unsure of herself. Whatever confidence she'd had earlier was beginning to waver. Later that afternoon, Daniel received a call from Lisa. We're sending a team to meet with the HOA tomorrow, she informed him. They'll explain the situation and ensure everyone understands the seriousness of their actions. Thank you, Daniel replied sincerely. I really appreciate your help. As he hung up, he couldn't help but feel a sense of quiet triumph. Karen might have thought she was untouchable, but she was about to learn that even the smallest battles could escalate quickly when backed by powerful allies. And Daniel, he was ready to watch the dominoes fall. The HOA clubhouse was buzzing with nervous energy the evening of the meeting. The room, usually reserved for mundane discussions about landscaping and holiday decorations, now felt tense and charged, like the calm before a storm. Chairs were arranged in neat rows facing a small podium, where a sign-in sheet lay untouched on an otherwise empty table. Neighbors milled about, whispering to each other as they took their seats. Some glanced toward the door repeatedly, waiting for the state representatives to arrive. Karen, ever the picture of confidence, or so she wanted everyone to believe, strode into the room wearing her signature oversized sunglasses perched atop her head. She carried her clipboard like a shield, though her usual swagger seemed slightly diminished. Her entourage followed close behind, but even they appeared uneasy. The air of authority Karen had exuded just days ago was beginning to crack under the weight of uncertainty. Daniel arrived shortly after, dressed casually in jeans and a flannel shirt. He nodded politely at a few familiar faces as he made his way to a seat near the front. Unlike Karen, who radiated forced bravado, Daniel looked calm and composed, almost amused by the absurdity of the situation. He knew the tide was turning, and he was content to let events unfold without interference, at least for now. When the state officials finally entered the room, the murmurs died down instantly. There were three of them. Lisa, the woman Daniel had spoken to on the phone, Mark, a tall man with a no-nonsense demeanor, and Sarah, a soft-spoken researcher whose quiet authority commanded respect. They set up their materials at the podium, arranging folders and documents with deliberate precision. It was clear they meant business. "Good evening," Lisa began, addressing the crowd. "Thank you all for coming tonight. We're here to discuss the recent incident involving Mr. Daniel Harper's farmland and its implications for both the community and ongoing state-funded agricultural research." She paused, letting her words sink in. Karen shifted uncomfortably in her seat, clutching her clipboard tighter than ever. Lisa continued, her tone professional but firm. "Mr. Harper's farm is leased to the state for critical research projects aimed at improving sustainable farming practices. These initiatives benefit not only this region, but also contribute to advancements statewide. Any disruption to these operations has significant consequences, not just financially, but environmentally and socially as well." Mark stepped forward next, opening a folder filled with official-looking papers. "To clarify, the land in question predates the establishment of your subdivision by several decades. Legally, it falls under state protection due to its role in our research program. Interfering with activities on this property constitutes a violation of that agreement and potentially state law." Sarah added softly, "We understand that living near a working farm may present challenges, especially for those unfamiliar with rural environments. However, we urge you to consider the broader impact of your actions. This isn't just about noise or aesthetics. It's about supporting innovation that benefits everyone." As the officials spoke, Karen's face grew increasingly red. When they finished their presentation, she stood abruptly, clearly unprepared for the spotlight, but unwilling to back down entirely. I didn't realize the extent of the situation," she stammered, fumbling through her notes. "I was simply trying to enforce the rules, to protect property values." Lisa raised an eyebrow. "Enforcing rules is one thing, Mrs. Wilkins, but towing a tractor off protected farmland, that goes far beyond enforcing guidelines. Did you verify the legal status of the property before taking such drastic action?" Karen hesitated, glancing around the room for support. None came. Finally, she muttered, "Well, I assumed." "You assumed incorrectly," Lisa cut in, her voice sharp but controlled. "Assumptions can lead to serious consequences. Moving forward, we expect full cooperation from the HOA to ensure there are no further disruptions." The room fell silent, the weight of the official's words hanging heavy in the air. Karen sank back into her seat, deflated. For the first time, she looked less like a self-appointed enforcer and more like someone who had bitten off far more than she could chew. As the meeting concluded, neighbors exchanged awkward glances, some offering Daniel apologetic smiles. The balance of power had shifted dramatically, and Karen's reign of overzealous rule enforcement was officially over. The fallout from the HOA meeting rippled through the neighborhood like a stone dropped into still water. By the next morning, whispers about Karen's blunder had spread faster than wildfire. Neighbors who once nodded along with her demands now avoided eye contact, embarrassed by their role in backing her misguided crusade. Even her closest allies seemed to distance themselves, suddenly too busy to chat or attend impromptu inspections of lawn compliance. For Karen, the isolation was almost unbearable. The HOA issued a formal apology to Daniel and the State Agriculture Department, promising to revise its policies to prevent similar incidents in the future. A new clause was added explicitly exempting agricultural activities on protected farmland from residential rules. While the gesture was appreciated, it didn't erase the frustration and wasted time caused by Karen's actions. Still, Daniel accepted the apology graciously, knowing that holding on to resentment wouldn't solve anything. As for Karen, her reputation lay in tatters. Stripped of her enforcement duties and humiliated in front of the entire community, she retreated into herself, spending most of her days indoors. Rumors swirled that she was trying to make amends by starting a gardening club, a transparent attempt to redeem herself, but few showed interest. Her clipboard remained tucked away in a drawer, gathering dust alongside her unshaken determination to control everything around her. Meanwhile, Daniel found himself becoming something of a local hero. The townsfolk, many of whom had previously kept to themselves, rallied around him after learning about the incident. Some even offered to help with the harvest, showing up on weekends armed with gloves, hats, and a willingness to pitch in. It wasn't just about supporting Daniel. It was about standing together as a community against unnecessary conflict. One Saturday morning, as Daniel worked alongside his newfound volunteers, he noticed Karen lingering at the edge of the field. She stood awkwardly, clutching a plate of homemade cookies wrapped in plastic wrap. Her oversized sunglasses were back, but this time they couldn't hide the uncertainty in her eyes. Hi," Karen said hesitantly, stepping forward. "I, brought these for you. As a peace offering." Daniel paused, wiping sweat from his brow. He studied her for a moment, then smiled faintly. "That's kind of you, Karen. Thank you." She handed him the plate, looking relieved yet deeply uncomfortable. "Look, I know I messed up. Big time. I didn't mean to cause so much trouble. I just got carried away." Daniel nodded slowly, accepting her explanation without judgment. "I get it. You were trying to do what you thought was best for the neighborhood. But sometimes we need to take a step back and see the bigger picture." Karen swallowed hard, nodding vigorously. "You're right. I'm sorry, Daniel. Really sorry." "I appreciate that," Daniel replied, gesturing toward the field. "And if you want to make things right, you're welcome to join us. We could always use an extra pair of hands." For a moment, Karen looked stunned. Then, tentatively, she smiled. "Sure. Why not?" By the end of the day, Karen, awkwardly wielding a rake and covered in dirt, had earned a few laughs and nods of approval from the others. It wasn't redemption, exactly, but it was a start. Slowly, painfully, she was beginning to understand that harmony wasn't about control. It was about connection. For Daniel, the experience reinforced his belief in forgiveness and second chances. Life on the farm taught him patience, resilience, and the value of working together. And though the clash with Karen had been frustrating, it ultimately brought people closer, not just to each other, but to the land itself. The field stretched wide and golden under the autumn sun, a reminder that some things were worth fighting for, and others worth letting go. The weeks that followed the harvest marked a turning point for Daniel, Karen, and the entire community. The once divided neighbors began to find common ground in surprising ways. What started as an awkward truce between Daniel and Karen blossomed into something more meaningful, a shared understanding of what it meant to live harmoniously in a place where rural traditions met suburban aspirations. Daniel decided to take matters into his own hands to bridge the gap further. He organized an open house event at the farm, inviting residents from the subdivision to come and learn about its history, its role in state-funded research, and the importance of sustainable farming practices. Flyers were posted around the neighborhood, and word spread quickly. To everyone's surprise, even Daniel's, the turnout was impressive. Families arrived with children in tow curious to see behind the scenes of the land they'd only ever glimpsed through their windows. On the day of the event, the farm buzzed with activity. Tables were set up along the driveway, displaying jars of honey, freshly picked produce, and informational brochures about the research projects underway. Sarah, the soft-spoken researcher who had attended the HOA meeting, gave a brief presentation explaining how the farm contributed to advancements in crop rotation, soil health, and water conservation. Her passion was contagious, and many attendees left her talk inspired by the work being done right in their backyard. Karen showed up too, this time without her clipboard or sunglasses. She wore a simple sweater and jeans, looking almost unrecognizable from the woman who had once strutted around enforcing rules no one cared about. Daniel greeted her warmly, handing her a cup of cider. "Glad you could make it," he said with a smile. "I wouldn't miss it," Karen replied, her voice tinged with genuine gratitude. "This is amazing. I had no idea all this was happening here." As she wandered through the farm, Karen marveled at the rows of crops swaying gently in the breeze, the bees buzzing lazily around wildflowers, and the researchers carefully documenting data in notebooks. For the first time, she saw the beauty in the chaos she tried so hard to control. It wasn't just a farm. It was a living, breathing ecosystem that sustained both people and nature. The highlight of the day came when Daniel invited everyone to participate in planting a small orchard near the edge of the property. The trees, donated by a local nursery, would serve as a symbol of unity between the farm and the subdivision. Neighbors worked side by side, digging holes, placing saplings, and patting down soil. Even Karen joined in, laughing as dirt smeared across her hands. By the end of the afternoon, a line of young fruit trees stood proudly in the earth, promising shade, beauty, and bounty in years to come. In the months that followed, the relationship between the farm and the neighborhood continued to grow stronger. Residents formed a volunteer group to help maintain the orchard, while others offered to assist during busy seasons like planting and harvesting. Children began visiting the farm on weekends, learning about agriculture, and even helping collect eggs from the chickens Daniel kept in a coop near the barn. Slowly but surely, the divide that had once seemed insurmountable disappeared, replaced by mutual respect and collaboration. For Daniel, the experience reaffirmed his love for the land and his commitment to preserving its legacy. He realized that progress didn't have to mean losing touch with the past. Instead, it could be about finding balance and building bridges. And for Karen, the journey taught her humility, patience, and the value of listening, lessons she carried with her long after the dust settled. As another autumn rolled around, the golden fields shimmered under the sun, reflecting not just the changing seasons, but also the enduring spirit of a community that had learned to embrace its differences. Life wasn't perfect, it never was, but it was richer, fuller, and infinitely more connected than before. And in the heart of it all stood Daniel Harper, watching the horizon with a quiet smile, knowing that sometimes even the smallest seeds can grow into something extraordinary.